into the chapter today because it's a doozy. Okay,
It is a doozy. This is a big one.
This is a big one. So we are into Daenerys 2, and here's the thing about the Dany chapters, and I always say this, is she's the easiest POV read if you're only reading her POV chapters, because she feels removed from everything else. It feels like her story just goes on its own. Because, man, it's been a long time since we had another Daenerys chapter.
Yeah, it's only Daenerys 2, and we were in the Arya 4, Catelyn 3. I mean, it really
Yeah.
does feel like they're few and far between in this book. But man, the scene she gets in A Storm of Swords, this is where Daenerys Targaryen becomes Daenerys Targaryen. Like, really,
Yeah,
truly is.
this chapter too. And one of the things I really noticed about this chapter is this is totally, we always, George always talks about too, about like when you're reading the POV chapters, unreliable narrators and perspective, right, of the narration and stuff like that. This chapter might be like the poster boy for that, because there's a lot of stuff in this chapter when you're reading it, there's no way it's possible. Like, and well, I'll get to it, and you'll see.
Okay, I'm very interested in
You'll
this.
see what I mean. I did the math. There's no way some of the things that the guy selling the Unsullied to Dany is talking, like the way they're raised and stuff like that. Like, he's totally lying out of his teeth. There's just no way. Like, that's not even feasible. Like, you can't. It's not even possible. So
I mean, I wouldn't put it past him.
Well, yeah, oh, yeah, he's a salesman. You're right. But Dany's kind of like believing it, right? We'll get to it. So Daenerys and one of the master slavers in Astapor are discussing the purchase of Unsullied through a translator. Dany is pretending not to know High Valyrian speech, but she understands everything the slaver is saying to the translator. Krasnus demonstrates the loyalty of the Unsullied, how the eunuchs follow every command given to them and feel hardly any pain. But both Dany and Arston, Arston Whitebeard, we know he's Barristan Selmy. It's Barristan. Yeah. Are horrified by the conditions of the Unsullied live under and the brutality of their training. The slaver indicates he has 8,000 Unsullied currently for sale. Dany informs him she will spend the night to consider the offer. Arston is against the use of slaves when sellswords can be bought in the free cities. He insists that if Daenerys lands in Westeros at the head of a slave army, many of the realm's people will oppose her for no more reasons than the abhorrence of slavery. Dany is, however, too proud to go back to Pentos as a beggar, not after seeing what it did to her brother, how bitter and angry, constantly begging him for help left him. Lonely since her husband's death and confused over Jorah Mormont's advances on her, Dany takes Eerie as a lover one night, the Dothraki handmaiden more than willing to please her Khaleesi. But Daenerys finds no release, only guilt over treating her handmaid as a bed slave. The next morning, when Jorah comes to speak with her, Dany snaps at him. She despises Astapor and has only contempt for the Unsullied, but she recognizes that they are too useful to pass up. Ser Jorah also gives Daenerys more food for thought on hiring the Unsullied, pointing out that they don't rape nor put to the sword the population of cities they've conquered unless specifically ordered to, minimizing the bloodshed that will and the usefulness will occur when Dany starts the war to reclaim her throne. He also points out their usefulness in answering Daenerys' query as to why Astapor has never been sacked, since any enemy attacking would face the entire garrison of the Unsullied. There are few neighboring cities and nations that pose a threat, and the combination of the Unsullied's reputation and heavy bribes offered to Astapor's rulers are enough to dissuade passing Dothraki Khalasars from attacking the city. Dany is tempted, knowing that Viserys would purchase as many Unsullied as he could, but she questions if she can be anything like Rhaegar, to whom Artisan and Jorah keeps comparing her. If the loyalty of her men is only based on her being bought and paid for, Ser Jorah points out that Rhaegar's honor and the loyalty he inspired in his men didn't save him from dying at the Trident.
The last lines of this chapter are pretty amazing, by the way.
Well,
like that whole last paragraph, that entire brick of text is so good.
Well, let's read it, because this is a quite long chapter, so I don't know that we're going to do like a big breakdown of it, like we normally do, where we go like, try to like paragraph.
Yeah, we don't have to go chronologically through it. No.
Yeah, but I want to talk about the numbers here and the unreliable sort of narrator. So when he's explaining the way they make these Unsullied, right? They talk about, well, then they're for a year and we give them a dog, and after the year they have to kill the dog, right? So according to these numbers, Jimmy, you would have to have like, it's like out of 10,000 people who apply, only 1,000 make it. And how many dogs die along the way, and how many children are there? So I found this on Reddit, and this is a breakdown of the numbers, because this is one of those things where this is like a guy just being a salesman. I'm not saying the Unsullied aren't hardcore, but there's just no way that the actual like numbers work for this. So to train one Unsullied, they'd have to kill 2 trainees, somewhere under 3 dogs, and 1 newborn. Leaving the dogs aside, that's 3 people dead for each soldier. In other words, to train one Unsullied, you'd spend 4 years. And after you get one Unsullied after several years, that's not taking in the cost of the people you need to actually do the training, the feeding, the housing of the dogs, drugging and whatnot for years before you ever see repayment even further down the road. The Unsullied on display range from 14 to 20, according to Danny. And according to Krosnis, it takes 10 years to train them. In the next chapter, there are stated to be 2,000 in training. So at the end of that, they'll have to kill 2,000 infants to find 6,000 more 5-year-olds, to take up for the next batch, as they can expect to lose 2/3. There are 8,000 Unsullied in the city, so I guess there's usually about to be a 1-to-4 ratio of in-training/training Unsullied. Jorah says that they do use the garrison for their own defense if needed. That might have been better saved with the policy of never selling more than 1/3 at the same time, under any condition. As the training is a long process to keep up their stock, in garrison, and still be ready for some, sudden demand of people trying to come in and buy them, the Astapori would need to have their creation of Unsullied more or less match the outflow over the long term. You can't sell them at a good price if they're too old. So if they add 2,000 roughly every 10 years, they also have to sell 2,000 roughly every 10 years, or about 200 per year, for the training of the Unsullied that they can expect about 200 surviving recruits. So like it just goes on and on and on, right? So like, and it's just like the numbers just don't even come close to adding up. Now, is this an oversight by George, or is this actually him lying about the actual training process of it?
Yeah, I mean, the guy is probably overselling it a bit, but this is the best part about it, is that like George could have just not have considered this, but you can scapegoat it by saying the guy's a liar, right?
Right. Yeah. So, so what do we think? So, obviously these guys are hardcore, but they just can't be killing all these many people in order to actually get in, because there's just not enough people. You have to have people to train these dogs, and it's too much. So, what do you think? Do you think Danny's buying this whole bit, or do you think she's no,
I think she believes. He kind of shows how disciplined they are, which Barristan goes, this isn't order, like this is madness, this is disgusting. And I think she sees that, but I think that she knows that she needs an army, which is why when Barristan kind of pushes back and is like, hey, if you come in with a slave army, people are not going to be happy with you in Westeros. And she's like, well, then where else should I raise my swords? Like, where else do I get my swords from? So I think, the Unsullied are, the reputation supersedes the lies, right? Like they are obviously feared. Like it's a well-known thing. They're not new. So I think even with his big braggadocious sales pitch, it doesn't really matter. And also, this entire scene is him thinking he's super smart, right? He thinks he's the big salesman. He's been watching the TikToks about how to be a 10x grinder dude, bro. And he's giving the pitch and treating her like crap, and he
gets up and reads, the 3 books that in his house at quad speed, and then for half an hour before he
he gets at 4 a.m. and listens to Jocko, and
he gets up and does 3 minutes of meditation before an ice bath, and then he
watches
he does not buy Starbucks coffee, because that's the easiest way to not become a millionaire.
He watches Wolf on Wall Street and doesn't realize it's a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be that guy. So
Yeah.
he sucks, is what I'm saying. He sucks.
Yeah.
But Dany is just like kind of letting him do his thing, right? Like she's
Right.
tolerating this garbage. So I don't necessarily think she's falling for all of it, but
Yeah.
maybe she is young.
I guess it also should come into question: are the Unsullied as hardcore as we think they are?
I think so. I think so. But you know what? People get reputations all the time that aren't true, right? Kingslayer. If the words that were to be believed about Brienne and her reputation is that she killed Renly.
Right. Well, I think it's we look at Grey Worm and we're like, oh, Grey Worm is pretty hardcore. But yeah, I mean, in a fight, if in a fight with the same amount of people, like 10,000 Dothraki versus 10,000 Unsullied? Who's
I want to see
winning?
that battle. I want to see that
Who,
Total
who's
War video
who,
game
who's
ceiling.
who's who's winning?
I'm gonna pick the Unsullied. I think they're
You
more
think so?
organized.
Yeah.
They also have armor.
Yeah. What about 10,000 Unsullied versus 10,000 like under Tywin Lannister's command? We're talking like Lannister men that are prepared for battle and are ready to go, and it's under Tywin's command.
I think the Westeros have gone soft. I mean,
Wow.
Robb Stark is beating Lannister cheeks left and right, and he's just
But those people weren't prepared for war. I'm saying like troops that have been preparing, like ready to go.
I don't know, man. I don't think so. I think the Unsullied would mop them.
Really?
I do, because
the Unsullied spend their entire life being like,
yeah, I and also like even in Robert's Rebellion, Tywin still needed bailed out, right?
yeah. The funny thing is, in the show, we don't really see how the Unsullied do against because it really once all the battles start at the end of the season, they focuses more on the Dothraki. We don't really see we don't see the Unsullied how did the Unsullieds do against the others?
Just about as well as the Dothraki that got destroyed and then showed up again.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, they didn't really show that. They didn't really show that. You're
all right. Listen, I don't want to talk about the show, but man, how just harrowing was it when you saw all those Dothraki run in and just immediately get snuffed out? Like we were like, sweet. Oh my god!
Yeah,
and then they just
terrible move. Yeah, it was sweet.
Brought it back.
Yeah. Anyway, here on the on the Unsullied, I do think it's a good point though, because it does speak to unreliable narrators and stuff like that. Because Dany's it's this kind of weird scene because this guy's talking to a translator. The translator's talking to Dany, and Dany's there listening to everything he says, and he is sort of bragging and bragging and bragging. I mean, I'm sure some of it is true.
Yeah, it's almost more just of filtering information through the perspective, because I don't think Dany's lying to us, right? She's not misrepresenting the situation, where Sansa misrepresents the Hound's kiss, that legit didn't.
Right.
Well, we think it didn't happen. Maybe it did happen, and then she remembered it right later. We don't know, right? And then in that regard, it's unreliable. And in this case, it's like the perspective of Dany having to process information from a guy she probably shouldn't trust. So it's a very difficult thing. I just love this chapter, dude, because I know what comes next, which is, the big Dany chapter, where we see, him get burned and then her speak Valyrian, and it's just phenomenal. But this whole chapter is kind of the setup to this, right? And she's getting a lot of good counsel. But here's one thing I wanted to ask you about things that might not be true. Do you feel like Barristan is overselling how many people are still for the Targaryens in Westeros?
Yeah, that's a good point.
He says a lot of people, but I love what Dany says. She goes, because he's talking about Rhaegar, and she goes, "What about my father?" And he goes, "Well, people still remember Aerys for the peace." No, they don't. They remember him as the Mad King. He's the Mad King. That's it. That's it. That's the propaganda machine going.
I do think though that there actually would be a lot of people who would welcome the Targaryens back.
Yeah, I think so. I think there are, especially because people are big fans of tradition, but I don't know if we're that far removed from the Mad King to do said thing.
He also this is one of those things too about the world, whereas when Barristan leaves, he leaves with Joffrey taking over.
Very
So
good point. Very good point.
when he leaves, he's also, I think, we don't really know. We don't really know if he thinks that Joffrey is legitimate or not. But I think you would have to, like, Barristan still views it as like, I served under Robert and Robert kind of sucked. And Barristan was also a like Targaryen loyalist because
he's trying to
right.
right his wrongs. He is trying to right, and he thinks about his honor a lot in the series.
And honestly, and if anybody's to blame for the Targaryens losing, it might be Barristan Selmy because he was on that battlefield, right?
Tread lightly. Okay,
I know. I'm the one who always says Barristan's the GOAT.
Oh, he is the GOAT. He's the best. He's the best swordsman. Dude.
I put him above Arthur Dane because
I wish he was my dad.
He has more rings. He has more he has more rings than Arthur Dane. Okay. He beat Duncan the Tall. He's got the most. If you look at his victories, he has more.
His accolades speak for themselves, and also the way Jamie thinks about it. I mean, we know Barristan is certainly an amazing fighter. I just wonder if his counsel, like, he's trying so hard to redeem himself to Dany that I think he's going to mess up. And it's not just this chapter where I feel like maybe he is misrepresenting how many people would be, which I'll come back to that in just a second. But also he is mismoving or mismaneuvering in A Dance with Dragons a little bit when Dany's gone, because he thinks it's Hesdir, or I'm always forget his name. But
yeah,
the preview chapters of Barristan in the Winds of Winter, it seems like he's making some kind of boneheaded moves. And it's not because he's mean or evil. It's because he's not experienced in making political decisions. He has been always sitting next to people making political decisions. So it is going to be interesting to see. I think Barristan Selmy will be a tragic figure in the fact that he will fail to regain his honor and maybe even hurt Dany's case a little bit. Now, to what you said about Joffrey, that's a great point. When he leaves the kingdom, it is in civil war. Joffrey has done, sent him away. You can see where the kingdom's going, right? So it's
actually, though, real quick, the Civil War hasn't even
kicked off yet.
It kind of has, but not like, he may not know that Balon Greyjoy's declared himself, Renly's declared himself, Stannis, he may not know the five kings.
But in that regard, I mean, when someone lands and says, listen, it's only been 20 years since Targaryens were in charge, and look at what these people are doing. Let's put somebody, let's make this right. Let's put a Targaryen back on the throne. And unfortunately for Dany, Fagon will be the first person to land with the Targaryen banner in Westeros, and he is going to take that welcoming party. So even if Barristan Selmy is correct, and let's say half of Westeros will rise up for the Targaryen banner, it's going to be underneath young Griff, which is the bittersweetness of it all.
Yeah, so I think I think he's more correct in the idea that if Dany had landed when he left, a lot of Targaryens might rise up and say, a lot of Targaryen supporters might rise up and be like, okay.
Yeah.
But where it's at right now, whether young Griff or not, Dany's claim would be the 3 dragons that are with her, because people would be like legit fearful of those. If she came over without the dragons, or like where we're at when the series with, at the end of Dance of Dragons, where, I mean, think about where the realm is at the end of the Dance of Dragons. I mean, it's in complete disarray, right? I mean, the crown doesn't even have its power because of the faith like blocking it.
Dude, it is actually crazy to think.
Like the Greyjoys barely have any power. Robb Stark's dead. The Starks are like gone.
The North is going into civil war essentially. I mean, it is
Stannis is like, so far, Stannis has been gone for a long time out of Storm's End. I mean, the realm is in complete, the only sort of like people in power at where we're at right now at the end of Dance of Dragons is like somewhat the Lannisters. Like, just because they happen to have the throne.
Dude, honestly, I can't wait till we get into Dance. I think Dance is such a good book. Ah, man, I can't wait. Like, there's so many details that we're gonna go over with the fine-tooth comb that we're gonna find things, by the way. Like, when we get there and we do this chapter by chapter read and that close read that I do, I'm telling you, we're gonna find stuff. And that's exciting to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's gonna be crazy. Because a lot of this stuff, especially Danny, is a much bigger role in like some
Oh
of the
yeah.
books. You kind of forget about it too, because like I was saying, like when you're reading this book, like Danny was a character. So I had when I my first initial read, I sort of got bored with certain characters because you're reading their POV to where I actually wanted to skip and be like, I don't care about this person. Like I want to skip. Um, and Danny is one that I think she is in some ways the worst POV character, and in some ways she's the best. If you only read her POV, she's like the best. But she's tough to read because sometimes you have to go 10 chapters before you can get another one. So it feels like far removed from itself, let alone being far removed from the content.
Yeah, I've always just found it kind of awe-inspiring that George was able to literally set up an entire country and city and its political schemes with history and culture and war and all of this stuff in one. And really, it's in the Dance with Dragons. Like it's all in that book, and it is crazy he was able to do that because it actually Marine actually feels different than Westeros. It doesn't feel like Westeros with a skin on the top of it. It actually has a tangible difference. Even the way in people speaking is different. It's just, in my opinion, I think it's really, really impressive. I also think that George is doing a lot of really interesting things with Dany, and takes very very good care of her character. Even so, a lot of people slam George for like his voyeuristic sex scenes and the sexual content of his books. And the one example that people always use, of course, is Dany and Drogo in book one. And it is in I don't know what to say to that, to be honest, because it's a
Right.
tough scene to get through, right? But I thought the scene in this chapter is very indicative of what Danny is going through as a 15, 16-year-old girl who is being treated like a queen and a woman, and that is her coming into her own, and
Right.
appetites are awakening that haven't been awake in a long time. And obviously, she did not go through her life in the standard way. She was forced into a marriage with Drogo, forced to mate with it. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's
No, you're
coming
right.
out. The damage of that is coming out in this scene, but it's also her taking for the first time, really, that into her own hands and her choice.
Right.
So I think that George gets a lot of flack for it, but I actually think they're good scenes. I think he does good things with them, and this is one of the good ones.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, some of that, like the sexual stuff in this chapter, because of the way it bookends with her being like, all right, I am gonna get this army, in a way, like it's kind of a transition because
Mhm.
a lot of the stuff what happens to Danny is, I mean, like you said, with her relationship with Drogo. I mean, a lot of the main characters, well, especially the female characters, all go through like unwanted sexual it
Yeah.
like it's forced on them, like with Danny we often forget about the fact that like
Mhm.
she was basically taken by Rhaegar, or taken by Khal Drogo in that opening scene because she ends up loving him. So people like always kind of forget that opening scene where it's like she wanted nothing to do with that
It's very
whatsoever.
rough. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's because she ends up sort of loving it. So I think when we think of the show, like the first one is the Sansa one, but the same thing totally happens to Danny, but she just ends up falling in love. Um, Even though in a way she's totally, what's the word?
Stockholm syndrome.
Well, no, groomed, right? It's like, I
Yeah.
guess,
I mean,
yeah,
essentially. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, Cersei, the same thing too. She does not want to be in that marriage with Robert, and she talks about like, well, Robert climbed on top of
Yeah.
me, and there's nothing, like there was nothing I could do. Obviously hers is even slightly different too, because she went into that first night being like, okay, this
Excited and willing. Yeah.
right, and then he said Lyanna, and nope, totally ruined the whole thing.
Yeah.
But here in this chapter with Eerie, right, like Eerie sort of wakes up in the middle of the night and she's like, I'm gonna do whatever my queen wants, because Danny's already kind of taking care of herself, and then Eerie wakes up and goes along with it, and then Dany, right, and then Dany feels regret from it, and then she also thinks about like who's that mysterious person she's thinking about, right? Like a younger, mysterious, shifting face. That's where a lot of people think, oh, that could be Jon Snow she's thinking about, right? Other people saying could be Euron because it talks about a man without a face, and Euron.
Oh my god,
magic! I saw that, like, oh, a faceless man. Like, no, I don't think so. But in this chapter, Dany's also like, she's thinking about Drogo, Khal Drogo, her love, and then she's sort of, by herself. And then at the end of this, now she's going to take an army. So there is like some transition of her in this chapter, like becoming more of like the
assertive.
dragon, I guess. Yeah,
Becoming more assertive, and also one of the reasons that kind of leads into this scene is she's thinking about Jorah and how Jorah kissed her, and even though she didn't like it, but she said it kind of awoke something she hadn't felt since Khal Drogo,
right.
And I don't know if that was like a reminder that she can still call shots. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's something there. There's something to this. I don't think George just wrote a scene where he's like, oh man, I bet people would like to see Dany, like, do this. I think there's purpose behind it. I guess that's what I'm trying to say is like, it is written in almost a very prototypical romance novel way. That's probably on purpose for commercial purposes, but I do think that it goes along with her character here, and she does become more assertive and taking control of things. And we see that even more so in Meereen, where she's having all these decisions, and that the only decision she feels like she can make is the one with Dario. And it's not a very good decision, to be honest with you, but it's one that she wants to make and be definitive on as she struggles to make decisions about Meereen in the meantime. So I think all of her like sexual escapades or questions about herself very much do tie into the person that she's becoming and who she expects to be, and kind of sees it as a reprieve from her responsibilities. And again, she's super young and has had a traumatic past. So it's just all it's all going into the cake that is Dany's character arc.
Yeah. Let me read this last bit here, okay, which is this is like the last like block, like you said earlier, the paragraph.
So good.
Tell me then, when he touched a man on the shoulder with his sword, what did he say? Go forth and kill the weak, or go forth and defend them? At the Trident, those brave men Viserys spoke of who died beneath our dragon banners, did they give their lives because they believed in Rhaegar's cause, or because they had been bought and paid for? Dany turned to Mormont, crossed her arms, and waited for an answer. The wheels are, so this is a note, the wheels are turning in her head. She knows what she's going to do from this moment on. I think this makes sense as she offers the Unsullied their freedom before she attacks Assapor.
Yeah. Such a good quote.
Yeah. Yeah, so then the funny thing is Jorah says, my queen, the big man said so, or all you say is true, but Rhaegar lost in the Trident. He lost the battle, he lost the war, he lost the kingdom, and he lost his life. His blood swirled down river with the rubies from his breastplate, and Robert the usurper rode over his corpse to steal the Iron Throne. Rhaegar fought valiantly, Rhaegar fought nobly, Rhaegar fought honorably, and Rhaegar died.
Wow. Someone knows the cost of the Game of Thrones, by the way. Like, Jorah is spitting straight facts, whether or not he's a creep, which he is. He has the right of it.
Yeah.
Like, Rhaegar did everything that was considered the right thing to do, even though history has now been rewritten to say that he kidnapped Lyanna. Jorah is actually kind of hinting that Rhaegar was in the right on this one. And it doesn't matter because now he's vilified as being essentially a predator, that he captured Lyanna and raped her and all this stuff. And Robert was the knight in shining armor, when in reality, Rhaegar was Prince Charming, truly.
Right.
And was destroyed.
Yeah. You know what else is kind of interesting here too is Jorah says at one point, there was no higher honor than to receive your knighthood from the Prince of Dragonstone. Which is funny considering he was knighted on the battlefield by Robert Baratheon.
Well, he has no love for the Starks and the Baratheons because they're the ones who kicked him out of Westeros.
And the whole reason he's over there is for slaves.
Yeah, man, it's just really messy, isn't it? Like Jorah's over here, like, you shouldn't be taking these slaves. Like, Jorah, what?
Yeah.
Remind me again how you got here?
Yeah.
Oh man, and I do love the idea that, she looks into Barristan's face and she's like, "This is a good man with a good face," and then she immediately thinks of Jorah and is like, "Why does Jorah hate him so much? Like, is it because another man wants me?" And then, like, every time she talks to Jorah, and Jorah forgets himself and says Daenerys instead of your grace, and she corrects him, and she's like, if you really respected me, you wouldn't have kissed me." And it's just like you see her pushing back, right? Instead of like letting these things happen to her, she's pushing back slowly. And man, here's the thing. Jorah, out of Jorah and Barristan, I prefer Barristan greatly. Jorah is a creep. Jorah is giving the better advice, I think. He is saying, go live, don't die on these hills. And then Barristan is over there saying, "Oh no, like they're all going to be there waiting for you. They're waiting for you." And then we get the Marine, and Barristan's mismanaging stuff, and it's like, man, Jorah never really mismanaged much.
In a way, you can see their own personal ambitions still coming through that big, for sure. Because Jorah is definitely been sort of put on blast once Barristan shows up. Even though, how does he not know that that's Barristan Selmy?
I feel like he does, and then he's just being coy. Yeah,
that's one thing I actually did prefer in the show, or that it's like, oh, that's Barristan Selmy, like kind of like that.
Well, if you're reading this for the first time, that's a pretty cool reveal.
I know, yeah, but
because like it's literally this guy that was in book 1 that was dismissed, and then
now there's something that would be, God, it'd be so interesting to find old forums. Man, maybe if we could look for that, like to find like old like forum, because they'd be all talking about the same things that we're talking about now, with like who's the ghost of Ironheart and who's this other thing and who's to see like what people thought, like to go back and see like people being like Arson's totally Barristan Selmy, you know what I mean? Like because that would have existed.
John Connington or somebody, right. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, John Connington didn't. I don't think he existed as a character. He hasn't. I don't think he's ever been brought up.
Have we heard his name?
I don't think we've heard his name.
I'm looking right now.
When is he first mentioned? Yeah, that's a good question. He maybe were mentioned at some point, but we definitely
never. Is mentioned in A Dance of Dragons for the first time.
Yeah, exactly. To say he's like totally not even.
Dang,
not even mentioned.
I thought maybe that would be the person people would. Dang.
Yeah. So, but that in itself, that would be interesting. But anyway, because Jorah, you can see now, you almost do begin to see a little bit of like franticness in him, where, because remember, he is still spying, right? Like, I mean, that's Dany hasn't found that out yet. That's the case. So I feel like you're beginning to see a little bit of the cracks in his armor, where he feels like in some way he's kind of rushing her a little bit. But yeah, like you said, they both do sort of offer her. They both do offer her bad advice, and then when Tyrion comes over, Tyrion do the same thing too. So
yeah, and that's the thing. It's like I don't know if any.
We think Tyrion will, yeah.
And also, they're all using Dany for their own purposes. I mean, Jorah wants a beautiful bride again, right? He wants to get back to Westeros. You have Barristan, someone who needs to regain his honor, and then you have Tyrion, who is just straight up down for some vengeance. You know what I mean? Like no one's actually going to Dany and believing in her wholeheartedly. They all have ulterior motives.
Dario too.
Yeah, Dario as well. I mean, for sure, Dario. So it's just, God, poor Dany, dude. What a sympathetic character.
Yeah, that's why I love actually where she's at right now, where she just flies off on Drogon.
You know what? If that's the end and we never get another Dany chapter, God bless her.
No, because I do think she's going to come, to her own thing, which is we talked about before. Her ending is going to be so different. So I still believe that her end is going to be saving Westeros, but she dies in the process.
Yep, I think she'll be the unsung queen. Unfortunately.
And then she will be loved. She'll be like, they'll make a statue of her or something, and she will be a loved queen. Totally opposite than the show. Completely 100%, like complete 180. That she will be the true savior, and perhaps Lightbringer or Azor Ahai or.
Yeah, and the cool thing is that stuff will actually have a way to be answered in the books. I'm not saying George's gonna say, and then that was Lightbringer. Like he's not gonna say that, but we'll have a much better idea than like people being like, "Oh, it was Drogon burning the Iron Throne. That was Lightbringer." Like, no, thank you. I appreciate it, but thank you very much. I'll wait for old Georgie Porgy to finish her up.
Yeah, another thing that's kind of interesting about this chapter is at one point Artisan says that it's been thousands of years since slaves have been in Westeros in a time before the old gods and new. Is that just like a one-off line that George just threw in there? Is that something about the way Artisan actually, slash Barristan knows about the history of Westeros? Because that's about the only time we've ever heard about slaves being in Westeros. And in a time before the old gods and new. So that's just kind of a weird, like, no, there's no real more lore to that, but that's just, so is he just misremembering? Is he just saying something to say it?
Yeah, good question. I don't know.
Because I can't find it. I searched and I couldn't find anything else on it.
Might be a throwaway line. Feels like a throwaway line.
Might just be a throwaway line. Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah. Okay. Did you have anything specific on this chapter, Jimmy? Otherwise, I can just kind of start going through it a little bit here and pulling up some highlighted stuff. If you had some other big talking points,
I think we covered the main big things. I mean, a lot of this is introspective from Dany and getting stuff translated from Missandei and her reflecting on her decision she has to make and whether or not she wants to use these slaves, which is where she becomes the breaker of chains. So, it's a very formative chapter.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, and a lot of this does have to do with slavery. And again, a lot of this really, you got to talk about, is it Krasness? I think that's Kriznaz. Yeah. I think is how Roy Dotrice says it in the audiobook.
Can't trust him.
I know. Yeah, which is like, it's Kraz and NYS. Kriznaz or whatever. Anyway, so you look at some of the things, and he's just a total jerk, his entire time. Tell the Westerosi whore to lower her eyes. The slaver, complained about her. I deal in meat, not metal. This bronze is not for sale. Tell her to look at the soldiers. Even the dim purple eyes of sunset can savage. Of a sunset savage can see how magnificent my creatures are. Surely talking about it, and then so that's a lot of that stuff is here. And then he does, as we talked about, I talked about the numbers a little bit earlier. A lot of this chapter is going over exactly how these Unsullied are trained. The training is most rigorous. Only 1 boy in 3 survives it. This is well known. Among the Unsullied, is it said that on a day they win their spiked cap, the worst is done with, for no duty that will ever fall to them could be as hard as their training. So you remember, it is said about the Unsullied. That's I think that's the thing to take away here. I don't think the Unsullied are as hardcore as we believe they are. Not to say that they aren't, and they're still probably the most legit trained army we've seen. But I don't think they're like super soldiers like we sort of believe they are.
They're not immortal. And also, I thought it was interesting that they're drinking this wine. Like, it's this like dark shade wine and stuff. Like, I don't remember that being in the show. I might be incorrect, but I think that's a book only thing.
Is what?
He talks about how they drink the dark shade wine or whatever. Like, that they're kind of like how are they able to do this? And they're dosed with this dark shade wine.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very specific drink.
Yeah. Let me see some other kind of interesting things too. Yeah, so much of this is just talking about how the Unsullied are trained. It's a long chapter, but a lot of that is
it's a lot of details, but I think we hit on all of the big character moments for Dany, which it is very much, other than world building, it's very much a Dany character chapter.
Yeah. Let me pull up some other too. I was going to try to find the part where she talks about. So she talks a little bit about her brother. My brother visited Pentos, Mir, Bravos, near all the free cities, the magisters, and fed him wine and promises, but his soul was starved to death. A man cannot sup from the beggar's bowl all his life and stay a man. I had my taste in Karth. That was enough. I will not come to Pentos, bowl in hand. Yeah, so some of that too, that like be a dragon, Dany, we kind of forget about that too, because we just sort of think about, her whole deal is going back to Westeros, and we often think about Dany as like a Westerosi person, but she's really not.
Yeah, she spent
Dany's entire life is in Essos.
Yeah, she really doesn't know what and doesn't have a lot of recollection about like where these places look like. The place that she's going to, and she does think about this in the series, how like the place she's ruled, she's barely been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, then better to become a beggar than a slaver, Artisan said. There speaks one who has been neither. Danny's nostrils flared. Do you know what it's like to be sold, Squire? I do. My brother sold me to Khal Drogo for the promise of a golden crown. Well, Drogo crowned him in gold, though not as he had wished. And then she takes a breath. My sun and stars made a queen of me, but if he had been a different man, I might have been much otherwise. Do you think I've forgotten how it felt to be afraid? Whitebeard bowed his head. Your Grace, I did not mean to give offense. Only lies offend me, never honest counsel. Danny patted Artisan's spotted hand to reassure him. I have a dragon's temper, that's all. You must not let it frighten you. I shall try and remember, Whitebeard smiled. He has a good face and a great strength to him, Danny thought. She could not understand why Ser Jorah mistrusted the old man so. Could it be that he's jealous, right? And then she goes on to think about the kiss.
Yeah, and the kiss is a reoccurring theme, and it'll continue to bother her.
Yeah,
she thinks she's tired of people taking from her.
Yeah, I do as well. So, okay, I think that's all the notes I have for this. Let me see. Okay, I do have a little bit more here. So, some other good quotes. There's a savage beast in every man, and when you hand that man a sword or spear and send him forth to war, the beast stirs. Then Ian Glenn does read that line verbatim in the show, and it's pretty great. The first few paragraphs are sort of like an emotional roller coaster. First, I was thinking, oh yeah, a Danny chapter. Then I read about the harpy, and I was like, oh, here we go. Because it does become a much more emotional chapter here. Some other things kind of interesting. Strong Belwas was seated on a massive thing, eating a great haunch of brown roasted meat. Dog, he said happily when he saw Danny. Good dog and Astapor, little queen eat, and he's like eating dog. He's talking about the food, but it suggests that Belwas is actually Danny's dog. That plus the talk about the Unsullied being dogs recalls our dear old friend Sandor Clegane. At first, he seemed like a good and obedient dog. He told Sansa that he wasn't afraid of a mob during the riot at King's Landing, but then he was afraid of the fire and he ran off. Now we're told the Unsullied don't fear, but what if they do experience fear later on? Perhaps they'll fear the sons of the Harpy, seeing as how they weren't trained for that kind of fighting. Wouldn't that be
I like that. That's an interesting thing.
Wouldn't it be something if they turned craven? It seems Barristan is saying loyalty would be better than discipline. But I think Danny earns their loyalty, which is why Danny frees them.
I think you're right, and I think Danny knows that she has to earn that, and she's doing the right thing. And like, also, let's Danny could do what a lot of people do, and whenever like she's been sold and bought, she could then perpetrate that onto the next person, right? Now I'm in power, now I'm entitled to do those terrible things, and she chooses not to. And I think that shows like the goodness in Danny's character, like as a person. And I think that's why I have such a problem with her going mad queen and like burning down King's Landing. I mean, there are a few ways it could happen. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but like these are the things that make me think, okay, that's probably not the way we're going to go with that character.
Yeah, which is why I'll still say this about the mad Danny character. I don't have a problem with Danny going mad in the show. I don't it's not the route I would have went with the character, but do I think that like the show version of her, there's enough backstory and stuff like that for happen? Yeah, because that's the way they went with her character. And there's like some people were like, it just felt like a total 180. It's definitely not.
No, definitely they had planned it in season 4.
Yeah, I mean, you see it happening slowly over time. We'd need a lot more to get to that in the books.
I think there's still a way to do it in the books if it were to be the end point, because I think what we just touched on a little bit ago about her not being a part of this land that she's supposed to rule, and then she gets there and they have taken in Griff and not her, and you know what I'm saying? Like she's like, well, I don't even care about these people. Like they are not acknowledging all these amazing things I did in Essos. Like I still think that there's a path there in the books, but I just don't think that's where this character ends up. I'm with you thinking that she sacrifices herself most likely against the others. I think Danny, John, others, like that's the triangle. That's the key to the series.
Agreed. Agreed. Okay. All right. Well, with that, I think that's the episode for today. We want to thank you for playing the Game of Thrones. In our next episode, we will be discussing a Storm of Swords Brand 2, unless we get a teaser trailer in the meantime, because I will definitely pop on back for that. And I think it's coming soon.
I think it's going to come within the next week. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if we get it today. I'm recording this on Wednesday. I think last time they just dropped it on like some random Thursday morning.
Well, we might be back.
Yeah, it might be back tomorrow. It never does. So we'll see.
Yeah. Hey, if you like our podcast, don't forget to subscribe, like us, write a review, leave a comment, or send us a raven at btkcast@gmail.com or bendthekneepodcast.com.
Exactly. And remember, we will be in Brand 2 next week. So if you guys are listening and you want to send us your thoughts, we can include those in the episode about the stuff you thought about that chapter if you want to read ahead of time. So with that, we will see you next time. And remember that winter is coming.